In 1973, a Boy Scout troop embarked on a weekend camping trip to Gooseberry Reservoir, nestled within the Utah mountains. 18 adventurers set out, yet only 17 returned. Jacob Swenson's absence lingered for 2 decades until whispers surfaced about his reappearance. The tale about to unfold is a recounting of the events from that pivotal weekend, narrated by Jacob's closest companion, Dakota Nelson. During a 2005 interview with a freelance journalist, Dakota was present the weekend Jacob vanished and immediately alerted the scout leaders about his disappearance. No recorded footage of Dakota exists as he staunchly declined camera interviews over the years. Since then, he's deliberately slipped off the radar, citing the haunting grip of this incident on his life. Where do I even start? What I'm about to disclose is an unfiltered retelling, an exact recounting of every detail as it unfolded. I've been branded a liar, even a murderer, but frankly, I couldn't care less. I witnessed the events that night and encountered something inexplicable 20 years later, upon arriving at Gooseberry Reservoir at 3 p.m. on that balmy Friday, June 8, our spirits soared. School was out for the summer, and being 13 years old, Jake and I were thrilled for this camping escapade with the Boy Scouts. We were seasoned campers, having ventured on numerous outings before. The allure of Gooseberry Reservoir's promising fishing and the freshly commenced summer vacation intensified our excitement. Jake, known as both Jake and Jacob among friends and family, shared my fervor for fishing, and Gooseberry Reservoir was famed for its abundant catch. Our campsite was swiftly established, our tents pitched within a stone's throw from the lake, a mere 100 yards away. Proximity to the water made us jubilant, it meant easy access for our fishing ventures. Jake and I, being inseparable best friends, naturally shared a tent as we typically did during our scouting adventures. Each tent accommodated 2 boys, while the troop leader occupied a separate one. After setting up our shelter, we wasted no time and hurried to the lake with our fishing gear in tow. That day remains etched in my memory. The weather proved ideal, and our angling skills were rewarded with half a dozen fish before dusk settled in. Returning to camp around 7:30 or 8 p.m., we relished a feast, cooking and indulging in the fish we'd caught, reserving the remainder for the next day's meal. The subsequent hour or 2 unfolded with us gathered around the crackling fire, weaving tales, and relishing each other's humor. It was a splendid day, brimming with laughter and camaraderie. When we finally retired to our tents for the night, I couldn't ascertain the time precisely. Without a watch, the hours seemed irrelevant in the camping realm. However, it was undoubtedly late, and I swiftly drifted off into slumber. My next recollection comprises Jake unzipping the tent, roused by the need to relieve himself. I soon slipped back into unconsciousness and awoke abruptly to the chilly night air brushing against my face. Sitting up, I discerned that the tent's door remained ajar, and I called out into the darkness, seeking Jake's whereabouts. Silence pervaded the night, my repeated calls yielding no response. A tinge of fear crept in, compelling me to venture out in search of him. Clad in shirt and shorts, I quickly donned my shoes and grasped my flashlight. Stepping out into the night, an unsettling sensation enveloped me, an eerie quietness, a feeling of being observed. Chills coursed up my spine. Every hair on my body stood on end. Surveying the vicinity around our tent, I failed to spot Jake. I wandered about 10 yards away, calling out louder this time, yet the darkness swallowed my calls, echoing back only a haunting silence. I was starting to panic at that point and decided it was time to wake the leaders up and let them know. Their tent wasn't more than 20 yards away, so I walked over as fast as I could, looking behind my shoulder every step of the way. Once I woke them up and told them what was going on, they didn't waste any time jumping up and getting out of the tent. Once the leaders were out of the tent, they decided to wake everyone up, not only for a head count but also for help trying to locate Jake. The leaders almost immediately started yelling out Jake's name, but like before, there was no response. The leaders gathered us in a circle and explained that we were going to form a line and make a sweeping circle, greeting the area, looking for Jake. They instructed us not to get more than 10 yards apart and made sure each person had a flashlight. We then formed a long line and started walking slowly in a big circle. Everyone yelled out Jake's name every few minutes or so. We'd stop walking and yelling to see if Jake would respond, but again, nothing. I wasn't sure how long we'd been searching when one of the other boys yelled out, "Hey, I found something. Get over here." I'll never forget the tremor in his voice. Everyone immediately ran to his position and looked down to where he was pointing. There on the ground was a small pool of blood. A minute went by without anyone saying anything. One of the leaders spoke first and said, this had to be the work of either a mountain lion or a bear. Another leader added, it's not safe to continue searching in the dark. The plan was to wake up early, drive into town, get the sheriff and search and rescue before going back to sleep. Though we all pulled our tents close together in a circle. I doubt anyone slept a wink that night. As soon as it was light enough, everyone quickly piled into the cars, and we drove down to the nearest town, which was Fairview. We went straight to the sheriff's station and told them what happened. A search and rescue party was quickly formed, and we all left, heading back to camp so we could help in the search for Jake. They even rounded up some hounds so they could try to track Jake's scent. We made it back to camp about 2 hours later. When we got out of the car, the sheriff took me aside with one of his deputies and had me show and explain everything that took place the day before, starting from when we arrived at Gooseberry. We then showed the sheriff, his deputies, and the search and rescue party, along with the hounds, where we'd found the small pool of blood. I vividly remember the hound standing there sniffing the blood and the ground around it, then suddenly taking off. We all took off following the hounds, everyone yelling Jake's name as the hounds led us through the thick forest of pine trees and aspens. We must have gone several miles through that thick forest, over some steep mountains and ravines, before finally coming to a river that was high and fast-moving. Unfortunately, there was no way anyone could safely cross it. It was there the dogs lost Jake's scent. The sheriff then called everyone into a circle and said they're bringing up horses so they can widen the search and move faster. He instructed the scouts and leaders to head back to camp but to stick around until they said we could leave. It took us a while to make it all the way back to camp. As we made our way out of the thick forest and our camp came into view, we could see just how many more people had arrived. A news van had even arrived, and they started running up to us as we approached the camp. Our leaders were quick to get in front of us so they couldn't bombard us kids with questions. One of the main leaders of our scout troop decided to talk to the news reporter and simply give them the facts of what happened. While one of the leaders was talking to the news, the other leaders moved us away from them and over to a more secluded area so we could be alone. The rest of the day was pretty much a haze and seemed surreal. I remember people scurrying around camp all day, but I vividly remember Jake's parents coming up later in the day. They were distraught and asked me a lot of questions, mostly about the events that unfolded and where I thought Jake might be. All I could do was repeat everything I had said many times that day, I don't know. Because I truly didn't know where my best friend was. I would have given anything to bring him back. I felt despair and emptiness that day and wondered what I could have done differently. I blamed myself for many years after that until I realized I was just a kid at the time and there was nothing more I could have done. It's not as if someone can plan ahead and prepare for these things to happen. They searched for Jake for several weeks after that but were never able to turn up anything. The search was eventually called off, and Jake was forever declared missing, his parents refusing to declare him dead. The strangest and most unbelievable part of the story, though, took place just 20 years after Jake disappeared. I don't talk about it much, as most people don't believe me. But again, I don't care. I was there, and they were not. I'd been back to Gooseberry Reservoir several times after Jake disappeared, to go fishing but mostly to remember my best friend. The summer of 1995 was the last time I ever went back, and I'll never go back again. It was the last weekend of May, which meant there was still snow on the peaks of the mountains, and the water was cold. This also meant there weren't a lot of people around. In fact, I don't recall anyone else being there that day. I always went back to the exact spot where Jake and I caught all those fish the day he disappeared. I arrived early in the morning, around 6:30 a.m. Fishing is always better in the early morning. I unloaded my fishing gear, put some bait on my line, and casted it out. I always brought a camping chair when I went fishing, so I set it up and plopped down in the chair, starting to drink my coffee. I'm not sure how much time went by, but it wasn't long. I remember, though, I was about to take a sip of coffee when I heard from behind me, "Hello, Dakota." I immediately froze because, to my knowledge, there was no one else around yet. I slowly stood up and turned around. About 30 yards behind me stood a man I didn't recognize. He was extremely hairy from head to toe, wasn't wearing shoes, and had worn tattered clothes on. I stood there for a bit, not able to speak. When I finally did speak, I said, "Who are you?" He stood there looking at me and finally replied, "It's me, Dakota." "It's Jake." I remember a shot of horror and adrenaline immediately flowing through my body. I stood there frozen, unable to move a muscle. When I could muster up the words to speak, I said, "Where have you been all these years?" Jake's next words will haunt me until the day I die, and I think about them almost daily. "I'll never forget," he said, "I was taken, and you must leave now. They're watching you." Leave now? Yeah, after that, I didn't even think. As quick as I could, I loaded up my gear, threw it into the back of my truck, jumped in, started the engine, and left as fast as I could. I looked in my rearview mirror as I drove away and saw Jake slowly walking back into the trees. As I drove towards town, I was torn if I should tell anyone or not, because who the hell would believe me, right? I wasn't sure what happened was real either. It seemed too surreal to me. I didn't tell a single soul for several years after it happened for two reasons. Number one, I knew no one would believe me, and number two, I did not want to go back there. If I told the authorities, they'd make me go back with them, or they'd think I was crazy. Another reason is Jake's parents were old and had come to terms with his disappearance. I couldn't stomach giving them hope and having them go through it all over again. I decided to wait until they passed. That's about all I have to say. I've never been back and never will. I don't know who they are or who he was referring to, but like I said, I think about it every day of my life. Hello everyone. My name is Ibrahim and welcome to Horror Stories. If you made it this far, I just wanted to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like. That helps out with the YouTube algorithm. And once again, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully, I will see you in the next one.